Welcome to the new Cyber Frontier, bringing you the latest news on the local Colorado economy and initiatives that focus on the development of cybersecurity economics. You don't have to be a computer or cybersecurity expert to get plugged in. Your host, Chris Gorog, brings it straightforward, asks the tough questions, and brings the cyber world to a level of understanding for everyone. Chris is personable and opens up with our guests on the issues we all would like to see addressed. You can find us on the web at www.newcyberfrontier.com. Now join our host as he introduces the topic for today's New Cyber Frontier.
Welcome to today's episode of New Cyber Frontier. Today's guest is B. Lee Jones. B. Lee has quite a long track record, and if I miss any, he'll bring him up when we go through an introduction with him. But over 20 years as a Silicon Valley Chief Information Officer. In 2002 was the #1 of the Top 100 award winner for CIO Top 100 Award for Enterprise Application Integration, and that was issued by CIO Magazine. Currently, he's an advisory professor and advisory committee for I think a couple universities. He could tell us about those. But recently was a keynote speaker at the Informationweek IT Leadership Summit in Las Vegas. Whew, wow. Welcome today, B. Lee. How are you doing?
Not too bad. I feel pretty good after that introduction. Thank you.
I'm honored to have someone of your caliber talk to us here, and we want to know, what it is that got you to the point where you are. I mean, this isn't your first rodeo, as we just said earlier. So give us a background. Tell us where you came from and how you got to where you are today.
Well, actually, I came up from your neck of the woods. I was born and raised in Denver. I had gone off to college. Unfortunately, my parents were involved in a very serious traffic accident, so I had to come back from college to take care of them and pay the mortgage. And I got started because I've been doing some engineering as a draftsperson, working with some engineers who needed some help doing calculations. I wound up bringing in a mini computer because they'd been using time sharing, so they could be able to start developing their own software. I became a programmer and a systems administrator. It was so successful that I got tapped by the city to actually be the coordinator for all the mini computer systems for the city. Worked my way up from that draftsman trainee position to being the lead systems analyst for the city within a number of years.
So was that Denver or Colorado Springs?
No, that was in Denver.
Okay.
We're not quite Colorado Springs yet.
Okay, go ahead.
I did a couple things around Denver, but inevitably I did get tapped to be a system architect for the city of Colorado Springs. The city of Colorado Springs is kind of unique because it's one of the few cities in the country, in fact in the world, that owns all 4 of its utilities. Mm-hmm. And each one of those utilities had separate meter readers, separate billing systems, and they wanted to consolidate that. So that was my project when I came in, was to consolidate all of the systems for the city of Colorado Springs and get that up and running. And as a result, Colorado Springs has some of the lowest overall utility rates in the country, something I'm very proud of.
Well, I want to thank you for that.
You're welcome. So I got some notoriety because of my work with doing the integration with these different systems. And there was a startup that was funded by the British government called INMOS that was going to be founded in Colorado Springs. And they were going to be using a new computer from DEC, a digital equipment corporation called a VAX. Nobody had ever used one of those. So the people from INMOS talked to people from Digital, and the people from Digital said, hey, we got this guy guy at the city of Colorado Springs who's done great stuff with PDPs and with all these different computers, getting them consolidated to run on a mainframe. He might be a good guy for you to, bring on board. So I was on board. I was employee 86 at INMOS and got my vax about 2 weeks before the Air Force Academy got theirs. So I had the first one in Colorado Springs, and I started up the local user group, got to the national level, in fact, in the DEC user group community, and was there for a number of years until they were getting acquired. I had a good friend who went to United Technologies Microelectronics, which is also in the Springs, and he decided I'd be a good person to bring along as, well, the title was marketing. I was sort of the Silicon Pimp. I was the technologist from UTMC that was in liaison with all the other United Technologies companies to incorporate UTMC chips into their products, so that UT, would be using its own micro components in their products, and that was really a cool job. But my friend, who is rather renowned in CAD design, got an offer to come to Silicon Valley. And he came to a startup in Silicon Valley, and they were going to be using a computer nobody had ever used before, because the company itself was founded by a venture capital group that also was funding this mini supercomputer. And, they approached my friend about, getting the CAD applications onto that computer. And he basically said, no, I'm a CAD guy. I'm not a computer guy. He says, but I know a computer guy. So that was the beginning of our journey from Colorado Springs to the quintessential Silicon Valley semiconductor startup. We thought when we came we'd probably be here maybe for 5 years. After our daughter was born, we decided maybe we'll stay until she starts school. Then it turned out to be we'll stay until she starts high school. And then that kind of went by the wayside. Now she's graduated from college and has a nice, successful career herself in field marketing. And we're still here.
Still there. Okay. Well, let's take a break and hear from our sponsors. When we come back, we're going to talk to B. Lee about a list he has of myths about cybersecurity. You'll enjoy this. Hold on for a minute.
We'll be right back with the rest of today's show right after these brief messages from our sponsors. Cyber Resilience Institute helps build strong cyber communities designed to prevent members from attack. Like building a neighborhood watch, it takes coordination and a sharing community to protect our identities and valuables in the virtual world. Typically, we hear that organizations know they need to do something to protect their cyber assets, but don't know where to begin. Let Cyber Resilience Institute help your community create an action plan. Cyber Resilience Institute will build your community or business marketplace so that it is designed to support a collective cyber defense. Contact them for more information at cyberresilienceinstitute.org.
All right, welcome back. We're here talking to B. Lee Jones, and before the break, he gave us the background and a great history lesson, pretty much, about from the inception of computing. But B. Lee, thanks for being here today. This topic of myths in cybersecurity, you gave me some of what you're going to be talking about, but let's go through this list you've put together and these are kind of the most common things that he's heard people come to him and say, and he's like, oh, wait a minute, we have to reset the clock on this. So let's go ahead and give us these, and we'll walk through them one at a time.
Okay. Well, one of the things I always heard is people, listening to the news and say, oh, we have hackers. Well, we know who the hackers are. Well, that's not necessarily true because, hackers are pretty incestuous. There's really a very small group of hackers that come up with the zero-day, the malware and ransomware code, and other hackers basically steal it. They modify it.
Okay, so we're saying that we don't know who wrote the code, or we can't trace who hacked.
Oh yeah, and these hackers get it, and then the government.
Okay.
Governments develop their own codes, and they become accessible, on the dark web. And a lot of code developed by the hackers is set up so that you believe the obvious source is the originator.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about it, if somebody's smart enough to come up with code to be able to do this, then they're probably smart enough to be able to mask their work to make it appear that somebody else did it. So, when you say, definitively that the North Koreans or the Russians did it, not necessarily true, because other people, and make the code appear as if someone else had done it, because if they're smart enough to do the code, they're smart enough to not make it look like they did it.
Smart enough to know who is the bad guys that can be blamed easily and blame it on the Russians and North Koreans.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, yeah.
So that's the first myth, and I hear that all the time too. It's like, yeah, we know who does it. We hear in the news, it's the Russians, it's the Eastern Europeans, it's the North Koreans, it's the Iranians. We always know, right? Myth number one.
But all that code, remember, there's a very small base of the premier hackers
Yeah.
who generate this stuff, and everybody else is copycats.
Yep.
And that's true with the government hacks too.
Yep.
If you're smart enough to come up with that kind of code, you're smart enough to have it look like you're not the one who did it.
Yep. So what's the second one you have on your list?
Well, a lot of people say, oh, well, that's always somebody else, that you'll never get attacked or breached. I'm too small. Nobody's going to do that with me. That gives you, I guess, an uneasy confidence about how secure you are. And there's no such thing as perfect security. The key is to be resilient. Like they say, to be able to take a hit and keep going. You can do, your security with prevention first mindset, and look at attacks as an opportunity to learn about the vulnerabilities and make changes based on that experience.
Mm-hmm.
But don't ever think that it only happens to others.
Okay. So myth number two, that I'll never be attacked. You could be a prime target because you're not taking the precautions.
Oh yeah. Don't lull yourself into a false sense of security. Be watchful, do your updates. Don't open stuff from people you don't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So what's your third one on the list here?
Well, the third one is, now that we're into this realm of everything being IoT, where all your devices talk to each other.
And that's Internet of Things, in case anybody didn't know what that acronym means.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. The Internet of Things devices. Well, a lot of people, in fact, most people I know, have this sense that, all of these devices now have, this built-in security so that, they can't be hacked. So that you've got, your TV connected to a voice-controlled box, and on and on and on. But the truth is, all the hackers are quite well aware of how these devices interact, and their ability to be able to, break that zero trust environment is pretty well known. So you shouldn't expect that just because you've got a new device that it has all the security built in to protect you from, that device getting into your network and being hacked.
Okay.
The IoT devices necessarily are, even though I hate the term, user-friendly, because if you have too much security built into them or you have to jump through too many hoops, then people aren't going to use them. The whole idea with IoT devices is, they're plug and play and they're easy to use. If you actually put in enough security to protect, then they become more complicated, more difficult for people to use. People won't buy them.
Yeah. All right, let's take a break here from our sponsors. We'll be right back to go through the rest of his list of myths about cybersecurity.
We'll be right back with the rest of today's show right after these brief messages from our sponsors. Over 3 million data breaches happen every single day. That's over 2,000 records being compromised every minute. So often, we focus on securing web data access. But what if the attackers are already inside, having gained direct access to your storage through data management software? When it comes to communications that go directly into your storage devices, make SNIA your first line of protection. SNIA's conformance testing limits outdated communications that are known to be used by attackers. It works continuously behind the background to make sure your storage is protected. To find out if your data is truly secure, visit our website at www.snia.org/cybertest.
All right, welcome back. Today we're talking to B. Lee Jones, and we are working through his myths about cybersecurity, and I think what we were on number 3, going to number 4. So what is your next item on the list for myths about cybersecurity?
Well, I guess under the general heading, cybersecurity is just a form of defense. I guess, again, this is a short-sighted view of an essential resource and a way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Security needs to be positioned as a strategic advantage so you can boost your efficiency and save money.
Yeah.
Not only is security by design and by default important for protection, it creates an integrated implementation that will enhance products, services that generate a competitive advantage. At a minimum, it allows you to take back many of the benefits that security software provides, and you need to stop thinking of cybersecurity as a cost center. Understand its value as a business enabler, particularly if you're in a company, but, also even if you're at home, having additional software to protect yourself.
So now, I just want to, if you could expound on that and say give our listeners some ways to actually do that, because we hear so many times and people say, yeah, we need to work with security as a other than a cost center, as something that brings benefit. But then people are like, oh, how do I do that? What is it that I could start to do that with?
Well, for one thing, make sure that you do all the updates to your operating system, to your application programs. Make sure all your licenses are up to date. There have been a couple notable instances where, there were some big interruptions in service over some pretty minor things. Marketo, who's a major supplier of marketing communications, somebody at Marketo forgot to renew their DNS, their domain name, on the web, and down for 2 days. Somebody, an independent person, saw that, paid to renew it, $35, and then paid the fee for, the penalty fee for renewing it, which was $38.79. So for $73.99, a major marketing software service provider was down for 2 days. And that was because somebody forgot to pay the license. How that hurts your credibility. Having a huge number of companies that rely on that service for your marketing communications, and you lose that credibility over $73.79. It's crazy.
Yep, crazy. Yeah. So what's your next one on the list here? I think we're at number 5.
Okay. Using antivirus software is enough. Well, it ain't enough. I mean, it's necessary, but antivirus software's been around for a while. Most of the hackers have found, multiple ways to get around it and hide their attacks in the system. Sometimes, they stay, hiding in the background for months. And that's especially true with ransomware. The time frame for, damage, then can be almost instantaneous. Prevention, from both known and unknown threats is essential. Antivirus software is a small Band-Aid. It's a necessary thing to protect yourself at a lower level, but it still doesn't protect you from, opening that attachment that came from somebody you don't know, and then it's spread in your computer and gets around the antivirus software that is probably there. So it's not a panacea. It's a good idea, but you still have to be wary. You still have to behave yourself on the internet.
Okay. What's your next one here? Number 6.
Well, this is an interesting one because a lot of people think that if they get hacked, that that's an embarrassment. We got hacked, so it's one of those victim things that people don't want to share their stories. That they got hacked because they think that they lose face. That's especially true with people from different cultures. Where saving face is so important. So what you have to remember is everybody's vulnerable. It's better to learn from other people's mistakes. So you should share that information. I had one recently that came up that I got a notification that looked like it was from Apple, that I had bought a piece of software on the Apple Store. And when I highlighted the links, it clearly wasn't from Apple. But if I had gone on and clicked on those links, it looked like the next thing it was going to do was ask me for my Apple ID.
Yeah.
Now, once they've got your email address, which they clearly had to be able to send the email to me, by giving them my Apple ID, there's no way to protect against that. Right? Your antivirus software doesn't know anything about that. All you've done is just passed a piece of information back to somebody to try to get into your Apple account.
Yeah.
So, once I got that, our neighborhood uses the communication software next door, so that we can get within the neighborhood. Well, I
Mm-hmm.
So, don't be embarrassed about it. Share your experiences so it doesn't happen to others. Everybody's vulnerable.
And help everybody.
Shouldn't be, yeah.
Yeah.
Shouldn't be embarrassed about it. You should just be embarrassed if you don't help other people.
Yeah. So the next one on your list is interesting, and I have these, and I'm going through with him. That I've heard a lot of people say, "We'll just go back to the Stone Age," right? So go on to the next one there.
Well, I mean, in some ways that's true, but that doesn't protect you. One of the biggest problems with data breaches is internal people.
Uh-huh.
And internal people, whether they're on the computer or not, they have access to, information. If you're going back to paper and you're off the internet, then how are you communicating? You're communicating with paper. Well, people can make copies of paper.
Mm-hmm.
People make copies, remove information. The downside to being disconnected is then you can't monitor for those kinds of activity.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's not a panacea that just going back to paper is going to protect you, especially if, the source of the breach is internal.
Mm-hmm.
That person doesn't care if it's on the internet. They go to the copy machine, make a copy of the information,
Or scan it in.
briefcase, put it in their briefcase, and walk out the door.
Mm-hmm. Which kind of leads us to the next one you have on your list. Digital and physical security are separate.
Well, in today's world that's so automated, more devices, are connected and controlled digitally. The elevator in your building, the power grid,
Mm-hmm.
public transit systems. Now it's more common, that attackers will, modify device software to potentially destroy physical infrastructure. That creates a lot of at least inconvenience and potentially catastrophic consequences.
Mm-hmm.
One of the best examples is probably one of the best known is the Stuxnet virus that was implanted in the Iranian centrifuges. The centrifuges, for the Iranian nuclear development people, Stuxnet was somehow got implanted, probably from a USB that got taken into the facility,
Mm-hmm.
and it sat around for quite a while. Well, its sole focus for attack was the motors driving the centrifuge. And basically what Stuxnet did was overspin the centrifuges, and it overrode the safety control, which prevented it from overriding, and it basically burned up the motors on a bunch of centrifuges for, the Iranian nuclear development.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's a case where, this is something purely physical, but you had, a major piece of software, Stuxnet, which, by the way, is now being modified and used for a lot of other different things by those cadre of hackers around the world. But there's a case where this was a purely physical system,
Mm-hmm.
and some software went in and did major damage. I mean, it literally, burned up hundreds of centrifuge motors and probably set their program back a year or two.
Yeah, so definitely physical and digital come together there in these electromechanical type of operations where we use electronics and signals and communications to turn on and off stuff in the physical world.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And now there's a lot more discussion, about the vulnerability of power grid of our, water systems.
Yeah.
It's a very serious area where hacking can do some pretty serious damage.
Yeah. So your next one on the list, protecting yourself is good enough. So myth number 9.
Okay. Well, organizations have to be aware of the others in their community and how they're acting when it comes to cybersecurity.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the big headline breaches in recent years involve third parties or organizations that are subordinate to the entity that was hacked. Everything in the ecosystem, from your contractors, subsidiaries, vendors, accounting firms, and can be a threat vector. Security is only as strong as the weakest link, and sometimes that weak link, sorry about that, that weak link is beyond the four walls of your offices or your home.
Yeah, definitely. So number 10, cybersecurity is an IT issue.
Oh yeah, well, being an IT guy, this is a sensitive one too for me. Earmarking online threats is something that the IT department is one of the best ways for them to keep the threats from proliferating. It's important to remember cybersecurity cuts across all the departments, and it's the same regardless of the IT implementation or the vertical in the organization. Once information's digitized, everything from the perspective of accuracy, privacy, and availability to actual data integrity needs to be protected. Cybersecurity requirements are paramount to the entire organization, from the data center to the branch office to the mobile device that your salespeople carry around. IT has responsibility for that, but individuals, and this again applies to your home as well as your business. Your security is only as strong as your weakest link.
Okay. And you had a last one, number 11.
Okay. Cyber risk. Some people think of that as a separate category of risk. That it's different. Well, there's no such thing as just being cyber risk. It's a risk. It's the same risk that encompasses everything from protecting your intellectual property to your competitiveness and the safety of your personnel.
Yeah.
Needs the same level of attention from your board, your executive directors, the management team. The concept of cybersecurity risk isn't useful by itself, and treating it as a separate form is kind of a distraction that you can't afford. You can't afford to be diverted on.
Yeah.
No, it's a risk. It's the same kind of risk as any other risk.
And even in our personal lives, everything we do now is gone on the internet or digital or on our computers. All these things we used to do, and even in our personal lives that were physical, are now all one at a time taking shape in the cloud, on the internet, through logins on websites, services, things like that.
Oh yeah, and there's a bit of complacency, because a lot of it has migrated off to mobile devices in the cloud. To think that if it's there, then it's secure, and I don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
That's a bad mistake to have that kind of mindset. I don't seem, I don't want to be a naysayer or a prophet of gloom. You just need to protect yourself. You need to compute intelligently. Use some common sense with what you're doing, and make sure that you are only dealing with things that you know about, that you have some certainty that there is some protection.
Yeah. So this has been a great list, and if you come up with more of these, you'll have to have you back on it to do this again. But I always like to ask our guests is, how can people get a hold of you? What types of services do you offer? I know you speak at conferences, you do keynote speaking. What else and who else should reach out to you to say, hey, B. Lee, I need your help?
Well, actually, what I've been doing, along the role of being a professor, is now I've been engaging with a number of different companies, companies I'd call companies in transition, either early startups, startups that are going IPO, medium-sized or large-sized startups that are expanding and doing major changes, or doing expansion internationally.
Mm-hmm.
I've come in the role of an interim CIO or an interim CTO to either get a project back on track or to oversee big projects of that nature. So I'm available as a speaker, but also on an interim basis as interim CIO or CTO.
Okay. And how would people reach out to get a hold of you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm B. Lee Jones on LinkedIn. You can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm at the max on LinkedIn for first level connections. I have 30,000, which is the max number on LinkedIn. But you can follow me. My email address is there.
Uh-huh.
So if you need to get in touch with me, you can get in touch with me there. And also my home office, my business number is available on LinkedIn.
Okay, so you can find it on LinkedIn. Do you have a website that you can direct people to?
Well, I usually refer people to my LinkedIn site.
Okay.
Because that basically says pretty much everything about me.
It does.
And everybody I know, and all of those nice things that people said about me. I didn't pay anybody to say those.
You got off cheap then. No, I'm just...
Oh yeah.
All right. Well, hey, it's been great having you on, and thanks again for joining today. We definitely, I think the listeners will take a lot from these myths about cybersecurity. Thanks.
All right. My pleasure. Be safe.
The views or opinions expressed by me during this podcast are my own and are not those of my employer, Colorado Technical University.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of New Cyber Frontier. Remember to get involved. Often we think that someone else will handle privacy and security in the virtual world, but you are the only one truly in command of your virtual fate. Join our mailing list so we can keep you informed of breaking news and new releases. If you have an idea, if you have a question that you would like to hear answered, or if you want to get involved with our efforts, reach out to us at newcyberfrontier.com. We also encourage you to visit our sponsors' links, as they are the ones that really make this show possible. I want to thank each of you for supporting the show, and we look forward to seeing you back for the next episode of New Cyber Frontier.